hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up, because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Greetings, my friends, and welcome to Armor of Truth Live, number 345. It's good to be back with you after some time away. Let's just dive right into it. A lot of people feel like, many Americans anyway, feel that their vote doesn't count. We call this disenfranchisement. The idea that a growing number of Americans have expressed a pervasive disillusionment with the electoral process. They feel their votes really don't have any impact, neither do their voices. And the reason is there's a visible influence of financial and corporate power, influence in politics, all the policy decisions. People believe and feel that they're not driven by the needs of the general populace, but by the interests of a small, wealthy elite. When large corporations and lobbyists wield disproportionate influence over lawmakers through donations, lobbying, revolving door employment, where the CEO of IBM goes in to become some bigwig in government, and some bigwig in government comes out to be a CEO of some corporation. That and outright misconduct has caused many to feel that an ordinary citizen's influence has been squashed. Also, it's the structure of the electoral system, including the Electoral College and the two-party system. All of this has contributed to a growing sense of disenfranchisement among all demographics. The winner-takes-all approach in most states often leaves voters in minority parties feeling that their choices are effectively ignored. Disenfranchisement. People feel that regardless of the choices they make, that the system is rigged to perpetuate the power of those already in control. That said, today, or in 2024, as we lead up to a presidential election next week, less than 1 week from today, record numbers are turning out at the polls. Summer, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone.
There she is. Right, so we've experienced this in the past few days. When we did early voting. I voted, was it early last week? I guess it was.
Yeah, you pretty much voted as soon as it became available.
First or second day, and in our little county, there was already like 3,500 people in this one location that had voted. And then
today it was 11. I was 11,564.
Yeah, so that's about that's more than they get for an entire election. So just to give you an example.
A lot of people are voting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at that one location, I think one of the ladies working at the polls said that, about 6,000 to 8,000 is about what they would get at that location for typically on election day. So it's double, triple the turnout. I don't know what that's going to, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But our message to you today is going to be very direct. The Constitution was designed by men who grew up in the fresh air of something called the Peace of Westphalia. This is a significant point in Western civilization when monarchy and empire gave way to the development of the modern nation state. Particularly the principles of popular sovereignty. That is the idea that the people are the government. Now, highly suspicious of tyrants, these men who devised this system of government demonstrated a palpable disgust for tyranny in their public and private writings and built the framework for the history's greatest experiment in self-government on an unwavering suspicion of tyrants. They believed that true power in a just society doesn't come from a centralized authority, but it comes from the individuals who make up that society or that nation. This is why they built in checks and balances and a system that we call federalism and a representative form of government. It was a system designed to empower the people, what we call today citizens, at every level, but particularly on the local level. It would be the people who would uphold liberty, justice, and order. Again, though, today, many people feel disconnected from that vision. They perceive they have no power and that their votes and voices are insignificant against this powerful ruling elite class and their political machine. But who does determine the trajectory of the nation? What do these so-called elites really have as much power as the average, Rumble podcaster, the average patriot blogger suggests? Are they really as powerful as all our peers are telling us? Today, it's easy to play armchair patriot and direct your audience of thousands of people, thousands of worried hearts are being directed toward the deep, dark dealings of the globalist cabal. It's also quite profitable to create that kind of content because it gets clicks. But what is the truth? What is the truth about this election? Who is really responsible for the strength and preservation of the American Republic? So the question is this: is it a lost cause? Is it worth getting involved in? Or should we set it out? Is it hopeless? I want you to understand. I want to tell you directly today. There is a dangerous and deceptive fallacy undermining America right now, and it's happening. It's happening in this sphere here, this space that we're in here. It's happening right here among our peers. Many of them want you to believe that these distant elites have a kind of supernatural power to affect their will on the world regardless of any resistance. What that has done, we're not saying that that's wrong. Of course, there is such a movement. But by assigning them this godlike power and believing it, that's distracted too many of us from the truth and the responsibility of our duty as vigilant, self-governing people, and who live in a nation grounded in the principles of freedom, liberty, principle of subsidiarity. That just means that the closest the smallest and closest government or authority is the one we should appeal to. That's a biblical concept. The Bible speaks against this centralization of authority in the hands of man, anyway. So, as we get into this, I want to make the case for you, the biblical case today, for why we should not be in fear, why we shouldn't be worried about the outcome of the election. We shouldn't be worried about what's going to happen if Trump wins or if Harris wins. I want you to understand what our position should be. What's going to happen on November 6th? What's going to happen on January the 6th? What's going to happen on January the 21st? Before we jump into this, let me show you a couple examples here of what's been going on lately and why it's important that we remain vigilant at home in your hometowns. Let's see. So, yeah, just listen to this. Now, many people say that this is a conspiracy theory, that FEMA was never blocking or keeping people from getting aid to people or helping people. The Atlantic and Rolling Stone wrote articles on how that's just a huge conspiracy theory. Hang on a second here. Of course, we've got to let me get see if this works now. Who knows? Who knows, man? I don't know why Opera's doing that to me lately, but I can jump over here. Boy. See if this works. Sorry about that, folks. Just give me a second. I have no idea why I can't get audio on that browser. It's happening every time. All right. Okay. See what happens.
We had a report for an elderly lady trapped in a house. Went down there, took a team, took an ATV. National Guard had the road blocked, and they said if you're not on government orders, you're not going in here, period. They said they had a team coming in for search for a house like half a mile up that road. And I said, well, that's not the address I've got. Can I give you my address? They didn't even have communications for the team that was coming in. The people blocking the road had no communications within themselves. And today is October the 4th. It's Friday. Since last Saturday, I've been trying to go out in communities and help. This is the 7th time a government official has turned me away. And I get it. I get keeping looters out. I get keeping random people out of communities. But I've been doing it for 15 years. I'm trained in search and rescue, in emergency response. I've got a team of experienced people and plenty of supplies. All I'm asking is to be put on a team, and leadership or organization is like foreign to this entire operation everywhere, not just here. Yeah. We have reports for...
So what he's talking about there is the federal government. Federal government is useless. They are useless when it comes to actually doing what they claim they were there to do. Talk about more about this in just a moment here. Let me show you this clip too. Because it's been said that there's an armed militia roaming around in the North Carolina mountains, threatening FEMA and all this. Let's see whether or not. Let's listen to this.
Down to this road here on the other side, and then
anyway, it'd be better if the people who make these videos, you don't have to add to the emotion by putting that song in there. You can just, it's the poignance of the moment is plain. It's plain to see. If you add that music, you just make it difficult for us to share what you've got here. Point is made, right? The claims from Rolling Stone and the Atlantic was this is armed militia, roaming around. No, I'm not saying there probably wasn't some troublemakers out there, probably. probably. Also, if you could check out on YouTube, and there's a website here called lifeinthewest.com. This guy's name is Trinity Vandenaker. He's a cowboy. And listen to what they're talking about here, what's going on there. This is more of federal government's involvement at the local level when the people, and most of the people who live here, have gone to sleep.
I was recently contacted by some people down in...
Of course, yes. Let me just get this over to the other.
Well, we really can't help you because we're on the lake.
I was recently contacted by some people down in very rural East Texas, and they told me they were going to be forced off their land and out of their homes to make way for a new lake. This lake was to provide water for the growing metropolis of Dallas-Fort Worth. The very first question that came to my mind when I heard about this was, can Dallas get this water some other way? Or do they have to push these people off the land and build this reservoir to get the water they need? But then I heard about something that blew me away and completely changed my first question that I thought I needed answered. And that was that they're not just going to take the land where the water sits, which would be around 100 square miles of rural Texas. But they were also planning on taking another 200 square miles or even more than that for something called mitigation. This changed my first question to, what the heck is mitigation?
And it's sitting in, Red River County, and here's Titus County and Franklin County.
And where are we at right now?
We're actually right here.
Right here, okay.
We are standing in this little section right here. We're standing right here next to the highway.
So if this thing happens, this definitely will take your land.
Yes, I kind of drew that off to scale the best I could.
Sure.
Anyway, that's our place. Cuthand Creek is the northern boundary of our ranch.
Okay.
And so it would get, I don't know the percentage, but it would definitely get part of our land.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, the big unknown. And then the big unknown, mitigation.
Yeah.
What happens after that? And won't know until the process has already started, until the permits are already started. So they have to start the process to know that.
I see.
And there's a lot of people that are sitting out there, and I hate to say this, but there's a lot of people that probably think they're immune to this.
That are going to
end up being surprised that they're going to take their land for mitigation. They're not going to have any idea, because mitigation doesn't have to come from the border, from the boundaries of the lake. It could come from anywhere.
Anywhere. It doesn't matter.
Way more.
Way more.
Yeah.
And I don't know who they
is.
That's what I'm trying to find. I need to find out more information.
Who is they?
But yes,
who is they?
That's what would happen. They would sell.
Who is they, right? Who is the big they? Who is the they doing this? I'm going to tell you who the they is. It's you. It's me. It's just people. It's just other Americans who are involved. It's people at the local level who've contracted with the federal government for something that they gave. And those are a great idea. We'll build this big fire station. We'll build this hospital for you, says the federal government. But then comes what's attached to that. Compliance. You got to do what we want to do now. And we're going to there is a process going on in the nation where they're reclaiming private lands by making them public and using public-private partnerships as well. Public-private partnerships, just another term for fascism, the real, actual fascism. All right. So the recent catastrophe in western North Carolina, the high country, western North Carolina, Asheville, and that area, that's known as western North Carolina. And then there's Boone, Blowing Rock, Banner, Elk, that's called the high country. And then in the area we live, it's called the foothills. And it's all been affected by the hurricane and the amount of water that was dropped on this area for days before the hurricane ever arrived. But what's happened is, with all the landslides and the big problems, people's homes being washed away, hundreds of people unaccounted for, what it's done And another one of these interesting kindnesses of God, it has exposed serious vulnerabilities at the local government level. It's revealed a dangerous misconception among the people about the scope and purpose of the federal government. And you may have heard it as you've watched clips coming out of our area over the past month. It's become far too familiar to hear American citizens say, "When is the government coming? When are they coming to save us?" Federal agencies like FEMA are not there to help you. They're confused by delusions of equity now, perplexed by procedure. Yeah, now's the time for good men to get angry. They're hopped up on de facto authority. They don't have any. They don't have any authority unless we hand it to them, unless we contract with them, and then they're happy to take and assume de facto authority. Agencies like FEMA are more frequently obstructing and discouraging local management. The pandemic of 2020 that extended through 2021 and 2022, and a lot of the effects are still here today, was a prime example of how this mindset was applied, in that case, to public health. Local authorities regularly followed unlawful orders, enforcing arbitrary federal mandates, not even federal mandates, just mandates that came from some bureaucrat somewhere. Mandates that obviously violated constitutional and human rights. No regard for personal freedom. And specifically when it comes down to FEMA and the way they work, they have no local knowledge. They know nothing about the area in which they're supposed to be providing aid. But to be crystal clear about this so that there's no confusion about what's at stake and exactly who is responsible, there is no longer any excuse for anyone to blame the federal government for being caught unprepared or for not defending our freedom. It was never their duty to protect our freedom in the first place. That's the first mistake. That's the first deception that we've believed. In 2024, the most immediate threat to your family's freedom and security is the factions of actors that have captured the federal government and turned it into this labyrinthian beast of bureaucracies that do not have your best interest in mind. This ever-expanding blob of agencies who have instead conspired to make us all dependent on their promises. All evidence indicates that those in charge today intend to make America and the very concept of individual liberty, the idea of popular sovereignty, obsolete. The only thing that will save us will be the good men and women of our towns and our communities, those who are awake and aware of this. Those who are aware of the most immediate threat to our sovereignty, our autonomy, the most immediate threat to our safety. It's been exposed. Now, of course, we recently published an article about this on our Substack that explains this slow-growing disease of federal dependence. And it describes how, since the Stafford Act of 1988, since 9/11, since the establishment, it's been you can see the steps that led us here. Since the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, since the centralization of emergency management, since it has grown into this vastly tentacled beast that reaches deep into American cities and towns and communities, it doesn't protect citizens from the effects of disasters. Instead, it has systematically undermined local and state sovereignty. That's really all they've achieved. Increasing federal control over emergency management, mainly through FEMA and DHS, has systematically undermined the ability of local governments and communities to respond effectively to disasters because they impose these one-size-fits-all solutions and unreasonable compliance requirements that one local official might understand or may not understand. But once you contract with the federal government, And you're required to do. This is why that people were being stopped and not allowed to bring aid into certain areas, because these local townships, municipalities, communities had their local officials had contracted with the federal government for emergency relief. So you're not allowed to bring any in there because whoever they've contracted with are the only ones who will be allowed to bring in relief. Maybe it'll take a month or 2 months. Who knows? Eventually they'll get there, I guess. Is that what we want? Is that really what we want? This is another reason why the election that's coming up is very important. But it's not the most important thing. What's most important is to recognize the erosion of responsibility at the local level. Local officials have become addicted to federal grants and funding. And our towns and communities have been lulled into a false sense of security. And the empty promise that FEMA or some heroic government entity doesn't exist will immediately descend into the midst of our crisis like a mighty savior to make it all better with food, water, shelter, and lots of free cash when disaster strikes. We saw how that worked out for the folks in the mountains. So when the local officials make these agreements and sign these contracts with the federal government, this complicates and distorts the purpose of federal aid. It distorts the purpose of a local official's duty because it reinforces the centralization of power, the centralization of authority in Washington, D.C. Local governments are willfully ceding autonomy of local affairs over to the federal government. That is not good. Just to sum it up for you, in short, local officials cooperate with the federal government to undermine the principles of self-reliance and community-based solutions that have always been central to the American way of life. And because of this, American citizens, just like me, just like you, are becoming increasingly passive in the face of these kinds of disasters, this kind of trouble. Government intervention has slowly overtaken personal initiative and community cohesion. Do you and your neighbors know each other? Do you know your neighbors' names? And if you do you have some kind of plan for if the shit hit the fan? Because we've become passive, we look more like subjects of a totalitarian regime. And that is antithetical to the traditional American spirit of individual liberty and self-governance. That's what we need to reclaim. That's really what's important about this upcoming election, and it's beyond the election. The American people were once known for independence and strength in tribulation, but we've lost it. We've lost this sense of personal responsibility. We've been weakened by learned helplessness. And that's why so many Americans are unprepared to help themselves and their communities in a time of crisis right now. But it's not just natural disasters. It's also the catastrophe of bureaucrats, the catastrophe of tyrants, the failure of worthless bureaucrats and incompetent federal agencies. Should have taught us a valuable lesson here. Will we learn? Our first and last line of defense against natural disasters and catastrophic tyrants is well-prepared, selfless individuals, private enterprises, churches, ministries, charities, and fearless, no-nonsense, experienced, or just eager and caring men and women who see a need and fill it. Anybody standing in the way of that is not your friend. They are your enemy. And so, contrary to popular opinion, the sovereignty of the United States of America is not secured from the top down. Our liberty, prosperity, safety, and sustenance in times of trouble depend upon the continuity of our small towns and our communities. That means the people. Far more critical than any presidential election is the American people's awareness and readiness and resilience. Are you aware Are you aware of the threats? Are you aware of what your local government is doing? And when I mean your local government, it's your neighbors. It could be your family members. Might be you. Are you aware of how the federal government is reaching into the local governments and causing these problems? Are you ready? Are you building resilience in your community? Because the true bulwark against invasion across the border, against catastrophes, the breakdown of American society even, has always been autonomous local governments and the civic engagement of a well-informed citizenry. It's just a matter of time before something far worse than what happened in the North Carolina mountains happens to the entire regions of the nation, or even the entire nation at once. Experts on emergency management and policy had begun to speak out about the centralization of disaster relief and the role of federal agencies like FEMA in emergency response long before the powerful remnants of Hurricane Helene forever altered the lives and landscape of our mountain counties. But the floods and the feeble federal response and the powerful emergence of local know-how and resilience in the wake of this disaster have shown us the way forward. Again, will we learn? So we're talking today a little bit about this and the idea of disenfranchisement, where people feel like they have no power, they have no say, and the importance of getting involved in your local elections. Don't care what you do about the presidential election. That's not the most important thing in your life. The most important thing in your life, as you can see if you'll watch Trinity Vandenaker's channel here, the most immediate threat to you is your neighbors, your own family members who are involved in local government and who are making these, who are contracting with the federal government, who are getting your local governments addicted to federal money. All right, so now let's jump into some of these points that you had, some of these. We saw this article come up over the last. Here's another article. We showed this in one of our shows, one of our last shows we did, which was at this point a couple weeks ago, where North Carolina sheriff demands a county manager resign over the red tape linked to the Helene relief efforts. This was an example of a local official who had contracted with FEMA, and of course it looked great, right? She probably got something really nice built for her town, and she looks like a hero until an actual emergency hits, and nobody knows how to take care of themselves anymore. And so this sheriff, who's also guilty, we're all guilty. Nobody's innocent here. So this is another example of that. And then we had this crazy article. Summer, what is this? DOD, Department of Defense Directive 5240.01. The expansion of military intelligence powers in life or death domestic scenarios. Well, what is this about?
Well, it's something that the whole internet exploded talking about over the last days, about how now they've given themselves the ability to use the military to get involved against taking down American citizens, if need be, with very vague definitions being the stipulation of what would warrant that to be something that they could do, that they could initiate upon the American public. And of course, the timing of all of this, getting that back on the plate, like right before the election happens. So really unsettling stuff. And it is legit. I mean, we looked into it. We thought it might just be a sensational story, but definitely we looked into it and can see. I'll show you. I'll pop over to the other screen here and show you some of the articles that we found on tap.
I can break this down for us too when we get through showing what some of the folks of some of these articles say. I can kind of break it down for what was actually changed.
Yeah, here's the directive, the DOD directive document, the PDF. And we've also got this mass casualty event that they're, saying that they need to be prepared for with a continuity of government.
Congress planning for a mass casualty event and trying to pass policy that would allow them to just appoint members to Congress instead of holding special elections, which is what normally would happen if a Congress member should die or be killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Yeah, all these things you can take a look at, and right here, you know, September 18th, all these documents coming out, they've just in the last weeks. So, you know, whether it's another grand psychological operation to just freak everybody out, obviously they're making moves to sort of cross the T and dot the I to make sure that they've got their butt covered in case there is some sort of movement that rises up.
Okay, so the story here basically was that there was a 2016 directive that was expanded upon earlier this year by Congress. It was basically the expansion of military involvement in domestic affairs. The idea is that the U.S. military should never be activated inside our borders. The 2016 directive focused on intelligence gathering with strict oversight to protect civil liberties and privacy rights. But of course, as you can see, as David Icke says, this totalitarianism is done in a tiptoe. The totalitarian tiptoe is what he calls it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What the 2016 version did was prohibit lethal force, and it restricted military assistance to law enforcement. The 2024 version, however, authorizes military involvement in domestic operations. And do you think that the military is going to be under the direction of the local police? That's not going to happen. No, it's going to be the other way around. Now, this includes situations where the use of lethal force might be necessary in response to quote-unquote imminent threats or national security. Secondly, authorization of lethal force. That's one of the most controversial additions to the 2024 version. And it is. Whatever the Atlantic is writing or whatever the media is saying, this is an explicit authorization for military personnel to use lethal force in domestic law enforcement contexts. That means inside our nation against you and me. Now, there's some legal oversight required here, but the directive does allow military intelligence components to assist civil law enforcement when there is a reasonable expectation of force that may result in death or serious injury. Now, this is why it's very interesting when you hear these stories coming out of the media that there's armed militia roaming around in the North Carolina mountains. Right? Those crazy rednecks. They're lying to you. This new directive includes a provision that allows immediate military intelligence assistance in urgent situations without prior approval from the Secretary of Defense or other high-level officials for up to 72 hours. So they're authorized to go in and act and use lethal force without any sort of oversight or questions asked for 72 hours. Anything that happens in that period of time apparently it could enable rapid deployment of military resources during civil unrest, national security emergencies, or maybe after an election when things get particularly tense.
Yeah, what I'm showing right here on the screen is they're building that story, that narrative that, yeah, there's these armed militias and they're dangerous and we need to be afraid, and here's an instance of this going on, and oh my gosh.
Yeah, the armed militia in the mountains, yeah. Well, there are obviously lots of constitutional concerns here. But again, let me point out to you that this still requires some American to follow an order from another American to pull the trigger and take out another American. So again, it's not some shadowy force in the nether regions. This is just us doing it to each other. I'm not saying the cabal doesn't exist. Yeah, they exist, but your most immediate threat is just right there in your own hometown. The people who live around you who either don't know any better or on the take or whatever. The Posse Comitatus Act traditionally restricts the use of military forces in domestic law enforcement. But these new provisions allow military support in these contexts, particularly with lethal force. And this is clearly unconstitutional. And the reason is because the act plays lip service to be, well, there's going to be high level approval necessary for all this. But as I just told you, for 72 hours, no kind of approval is necessary. You just do what needs to be done. Right? That's how you bypass the spirit of the Posse Comitatus Act, which prevents the government from using the military on its people. This has the First and Fourth Amendments, too. The expanded role of military intelligence in civil affairs would infringe on the First Amendment rights, particularly the freedom of speech and the right to protest. Broad definitions of national security threats, of course. There's nothing, they can call anything a national security threat. You can see that clearly you're going to find people that are called Trump supporters, they're going to be called national security threats. And so now there's now we might see some bullets fired, and this would be tragic. They've also increased the surveillance powers. Fourth Amendment, enhanced military involvement, intelligence collection for civilian purposes, even if it's under emergency circumstances, is constitutional. This is unconstitutional surveillance. Fifth Amendment issues also. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process. You're not supposed to, no person is supposed to be judge and jury right there in that moment. But this rapid authorization of military use and lethal force in emergency scenarios would certainly bypass any of these constitutional or procedural protections that citizens normally have. This is crazy, right? This expansion of military authority into domestic law enforcement is a dangerous and egregious overreach of federal government power. This goes beyond liberties of the American people. This is, I mean, we're right into now. You know, when we think about the Soviet Union in the early 20th century, when we think about China in the middle of the 20th century, and how those people were kept under control with in China with the Red Guard and with lethal force. Is anybody paying attention to what's happening? The Department of Defense is stepping into a realm where it shouldn't be allowed, where it's constitutionally disallowed. Civilian authorities, they're stepping into the role of local authorities once again. From a constitutional standpoint, this violates many core principles. The use of military force in civilian law enforcement, First Amendment rights, where a protester can be deemed, or a political dissident could be targeted under this broad justification of national security, right? Clearly this is about J6, right? Obviously that's what this is about. They want to be able, I don't know, if Trump was to win, they want to be able to use as much force as they see fit. It's not a hypothetical risk. From a biblical perspective, this notion of government wielding this kind of unchecked military power, isn't it interesting that you hear from, when you hear the candidates going back and forth, that the people on the left seem to be claiming that it's the Republicans who want unchecked power. And I'm not saying that they don't, but these are the people, this is the regime that's actually trying to pass these policies right now. So it's violation of Romans 13. Governments are there to protect and serve the people. Governments are there to act as ministers of justice, not to undermine the God-given rights of individuals who live peacefully without fear of state violence. All right, let's see now. Yeah, so I guess this is President George W. Bush's daughter has now said she's going to support Kamala Harris. Let's just play that and see what that's like. It's just, again, they're just letting you know. They're just telling you who they are.
The neocons.
Yeah.
This just into us, Barbara Pierce Bush, one of the former President George W. Bush's daughters, has just announced who she will back for president in a statement to People magazine. She said that she was hopeful that voters will support Vice President Kamala Harris on Election Day in order to move our country forward and protect women's rights. She spent the weekend in Pennsylvania, adding that she was inspired to join friends and meet voters with the Harris Waltz campaign. This just into us.
Funny, huh? I like this tweet here that the terms they're talking about communist and fascist because of the way that because of the way the media has handled this. They've done a good job at really, these terms really don't mean anything anymore because people have heard them so much, and now it's just normal to call Trump a fascist, but who is, what's the truth? What is the truth? Who is really acting in this way? More here. We covered this for you a few videos back. Wikipedia, how Wikipedia has been captured for years by radical left ideology. So they officially deem Trump a fascist. We don't really get definitions. We just get pejorative terms. More about the migrants here, immigrants, and boy, this is great right here. Let's just check this out too.
I'm pleased to partner with OMH in advancing better health through better understanding.
This is your federal government here, folks. This is why we need to, what we need to do is we need to make the federal government and all their agencies irrelevant. How do we do that? How do we make this nonsense irrelevant? We live and act responsibly.
For black communities. Climate change is having a disproportionate effect on the physical and mental health of black communities. Black Americans are more likely than white Americans to live in areas and housing that increase their susceptibility to climate-related health issues.
I don't know, but I just have to bring it up, right? What the demographics of the North Carolina mountains, especially the area that hit by this climate event, nothing that they say makes any sense. So of course we understand. Propaganda. So strange. What a strange clown world, right?
We might think we knew the results of elections a lot sooner. In previous elections, we really didn't. It was just the margins were so large that we were able to. Listen to
this. They're already getting ready to normalize the fraud that they're, the lies that they're going to be pitching to you as you get closer to the election. And of course, probably not going to be any decision right then. There's going to be some kind of lawsuits and delays. It's going to probably go on for a few days. I know in, what was it, 2000 or 2004? Where we didn't know who won the election until December, when it was, I guess, what was that, Bush and Gore? Gore finally conceded because what's their fraternity? Bonesmen. They're both bonesmen. So it was easy to get them to get Gore to agree, I guess. Or that was Kerry, I guess. I can't remember. It's been too long. I've slept since then.
to call the elections earlier. It always takes a long time to count ballots. We're going to see that again, and margins are likely to be tight, so we might need to wait a few days in states like Georgia.
You're
and
just going to need to wait a few days because we're just going to need to make sure we get
Just
this
like
right.
we're going to drop in a candidate that nobody elected.
Yeah, right. Because it's democracy.
And David, I really don't think we can emphasize enough the way in which each state has different rules for counting, and the result can be somewhat suspicious looking on the surface.
Oh, we just can't emphasize enough. We just can't emphasize enough.
It might look suspicious, but you just need to trust us.
Processes with the count, right? It's not just one. If you got a jar of jelly beans, it's not like one red, one blue, one red, one blue. Sometimes handfuls of results come in at one time, a handful of other results at another time.
No, but it really is. It really is just one vote counted at a time. That really is how voting works. It's really that simple.
Could you just talk generally about how we should see the count unfold at that state level?
Right. So we have to remember, and you mentioned this earlier, we run the most complicated elections in the world.
Whatever. So you see what's going to happen, right? It's not going to be cut and dried.
Yeah, can I just put up this one slide right here, this quote? We gave it the last time we had a show, but it's really on point, and I just want to remind you guys of it. It says, what makes it possible for a totalitarian or any other dictatorship to rule is that people are not informed. How can you have an opinion if you are not informed? If everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. And a people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and judge. And with such a people, you can then do what you please. So this is this sort of paralyzing state that they're putting most people in, because they're definitely making an that's part of the operation, is that both sides, left and right, will be giving conflicting information and conflicting media coverage, and they'll be, each side will call up different points so that the other, it just more and more and more polarization. That's how they collapse countries from within. That's how we know that we've been captured.
Here's a tweet from Calvin Robinson. Silent prayer has been criminalized in the UK. And of course, it starts there. Usually it ends up here. So that's thought crime. You can't think certain things. And here is, what's her name again? This is
Beverly.
Beverly. Oh, goodness. Every time we do that, it does that. It switches back to the top. Here we go. Goodness, what is her name? Beverlyn. It's
Beverlyn.
Beverlyn.
Yeah.
Come on, we need. Well,
it jumps over to the sidebar.
Yeah,
That's what it does.
I've got it there. It's just.
Yeah, really sad story though. Obviously, she was speaking out against BLM, and then she was involved in, pro-life demonstrations, and definitely got very vocal. And now she's going to prison.
Right. So we just heard from the man in the dress earlier, who was telling us how black folks are way more endangered by climate change, but he didn't say much about how black folks are endangered by the federal government here, putting people in jail. So it was. Did she not? I think she finally got pinched for being on at an abortion clinic, right?
Yeah. That's what they got her on, but we know that, of course, they're not going to be happy about the way that she was calling BLM out.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, she was in the crosshairs. Mm-hmm. Long before.
Yeah.
So this is. Let me just jump over here and let me just wrap this up for you, because I want to make sure we say this to you. I want you to understand how we should be thinking. We cannot be in fear of this. These people don't have the control that you think they do. They don't have the power that you think they do. Trump doesn't. Biden, Harris, these Democrats, they don't have the power that many YouTubers and bloggers are telling you they do. Now, I'm not saying these people are being dishonest. A lot of people just think these people are supernatural and that they have control of everything. And so people feel disenfranchised. The principles of liberty, in alignment with biblical teaching on stewardship, accountability, and distribution of authority, have always emphasized a preference for governance that's closest to the community level, allowing families, churches, and local governments to manage their own affairs. That's again that principle of subsidiarity. Historical examples of local civic power grounded in the eternal, unchanging truth of God's Word destroy the fallacy that many of our fellow bloggers and YouTubers are selling you right now. But this disillusionment misses a critical reality fundamental to American liberty. The United States was designed to be safeguarded and shaped from the bottom up, not the top down. So if we're not engaged, if we're just sitting back and, you know, it's kind of popular today, right, to do videos about the elites, about the satanic elites and how they're controlling the world, but they don't have any power without us going along with whatever they're doing. The bedrock of America's strength has always been the people and our engagement at the local level. Federal laws and leaders do set broad national policies, but it's the activity of citizens, you and me, in towns and counties and states. We're the ones that actually form the backbone of the nation's identity and values. We're the ones who decide whether or not bad laws are going to be enforced. And that's because local governments have substantially more power and influence in the day-to-day lives of Americans. Schools, police departments, zoning and infrastructure. And the founders of the nation were keenly aware of the dangers that we're looking at today, the dangers of centralized power, dangers that, they designed a system to prevent that. But it would require the people to be aware, to be ready, to be resilient. One of the most notable examples of this is you see the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Now, we can also show you how that's where we diverged into one group who believes that the Constitution is a document that's written and settled, and another group who believes it's constantly evolving and up for interpretation. And this is why we have this clash going on today. But way before any federal laws were enacted, local communities and churches and citizens had done what they could to battle injustices that they saw. They were way ahead of the federal government. Prohibition in the early 20th century. Another example. But I want to talk more about this idea of powerlessness. It's a fallacy. It's a fallacy it's a disservice for anyone to make you feel like you have no power and there's nothing you can do. The belief that individual citizens have no power. That's a fallacy. And it risks causing people to disengage from their civic duty. Local engagement's not just a democratic ideal, but it's the proven path. It's the way. It's how we protect ourselves. It's the way we create actual change, real lasting change and accountability. That's when we're actively involved, when we hold local leaders accountable, when we advocate for policies that align with our values. All of this creates a ripple effect that goes from the local level upward into the higher levels of government. America's greatest strength has always been a vigilant, self-governing populace. We're the real checks and balances on authority from the ground up. Are you beginning to see? All right, this is just a trickle of the anti-freedom floodwaters that have been rising in America for some time now. And if your vision's still a bit blurry, let me clarify for you. Crowing and boasting about the Constitution, about your God-given rights to life, liberty, and property, free speech, all of this is meaningless unless you're willing to engage, the enemy of your and your family's freedom, unless you're willing to defend the principles enumerated in the Constitution, then it's all meaningless. The Constitution is the standard of liberty. It's the rule. It's the rod. It's what defines and limits governmental authority and secures human rights. But who is it that secures the Constitution? It has to be the people. And that's what the Constitution calls for. It calls for the people to be informed and well-armed. That's why they want your guns. The Constitution secures your rights, and it's your duty to secure the Constitution. First, by engaging in civic duty in times of peace, and God forbid, if the time comes, fighting to defend liberty when it's under attack. That's how the Constitution remains in force. That's how freedom works, because free men are willing to accept the responsibility of freedom because they know that the consequences are worth it, and that the alternative is out of the question. So for those of you who feel disenfranchised and disheartened by the way the system works now, what it looks like, you feel like your voice has no power, the Bible has encouragement for you. Romans 13, Paul urges believers to respect and participate in the governing structures. Paul reminds us that government is instituted by God for the purpose of promoting justice and righteousness. So we have to hold them accountable. That is an act of faith. Proverbs 31 calls believers to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, to stand up for the rights of all who are destitute, right? That's an encouragement from God to us to be advocates within our communities. The Bible emphasizes the importance of individual action in preserving justice and truth. In Micah 6:8, it says, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That's a commitment to living out justice. It's not just as a passive observer, but as an active participant. Parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10 illustrates the importance of individual action over waiting for institutions or the elites to act. It was the Samaritan who was moved by compassion. He did what other people were unwilling to do. So in our local, where you live, in our communities, this compassion translates to participating actively, even if you feel disillusioned or disenfranchised. Stand up for what's right, for the betterment of your community. Each vote cast, each town hall attended, each voice raised is a contribution to justice and mercy. It's an act that God can bless. He can't bless our inaction. He won't. America's preservation rests not on those shadowy elites and the cabal. It rests on you, well-informed, civically active citizenry, to uphold and keep the nation strong from the ground up. That means by engaging locally. That means by voting. Whatever you think about the system, you don't want to vote for president, that's fine. You need to be voting and being involved in your local government. I mean, when you go and you look at a ballot, 90% of the ballot is local stuff or regional. It's judges, it's state, it's congressmen or senators. But probably our ballot was probably well over half of it was local government. So if you decide just not to show up and vote, you're just telling whoever wants to take control of your local government, yeah, it's fine, go ahead and do it. I don't care. A lot of people will say, yeah, if you go and you vote, you're signing off on their wickedness, or you're giving your okay to whatever they're doing. Okay. I disagree. I think that if you don't, and you allow whoever wants to take control of your local government, you're just handing your freedom over to people you don't know. You don't know what they want. You don't know what they want to do. It's just irresponsible. It's not wise. This is a responsibility that's rooted in history and Scripture. And it's time for us to reclaim our role in local government, to embody the biblical mandate, to act justly, to love mercy, to contribute to a society that would be marked by righteousness. Now listen, the last thing I want to say to you is this. This is the most important thing. The serpent, that old dragon, Satan, and all those who follow his direction, they want to control us with fear. They want us to believe that God is just trying to keep up with the elites and the globalists. Many of our peers, many of the people who do this kind of work on YouTube and Substack and Rumble, many of the people you hear believe this. They believe that well, there's a spiritual domain over here, but right out here in the physical world where we exist, we have to do things our way. Listen, how powerful would we be? Honestly, ask yourself, how powerful would we be if we were truly free from fear? If they couldn't control us with fear, how powerful would we be? If we genuinely rested in Christ's promises and his authority, our joy and our peace would truly make us more than conquerors. That's why it's so vital that we understand God's sovereignty over all things. In John 16, Jesus tells his disciples, and by application, he's instructing us, that the world will hate us because of his name, but that he would send us the helper. He would send us the Spirit of truth. He tells us that we can rely on the truth when things become confusing. He tells us that because unbelief will cause even those who claim to be working for God to persecute and kill us. Now, in John 16:32, Jesus says, "Behold, the hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone." Jesus assures us that this is God's plan. And he does so that we won't be surprised, so that we'll know how to respond, and so that we'll know that he has not forgotten us. And so all of this hardship is precisely as it should be. The problem is we don't believe God. We like to claim God's promises when it's about victory, but we don't really want to suffer with Christ. We lack faith. Now in John 16, Jesus believes this list of instructions by saying, "I've said all these things to you to keep you from falling away." That's verse 1. And then he concludes this passage. This passage concludes with another assurance in John 16:33, where he says, "I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation." You'll have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Why do we not believe him? Here's a truth. Here's a very important eternal truth. This world is already under the full rule and reign of Jesus Christ, already under his reign. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So why is there sickness? Why is there death? Why is there suffering? Why do the wicked seem to prosper? Why does the cabal seem to have this crazy power? We're not winning. We're not losing. And we're not even tied in this battle. Friends, the war has already been won. Will we believe? Will we believe our Savior King? Because even when we lose, we win. Jesus has not only overcome the world, he has death on a leash. He told us to be of good cheer right there in chapter 16, John's Gospel. He told us to take courage because we have been freed from fear of the world. This freedom makes us more than conquerors. The enemy and these so-called elites, the shadowy cabal, want to control us through fear. They can hiss and spit all they want, but when we believe the promises of our Savior, they can't touch us. So if we allow ourselves to be consumed by their plans and schemes, then we will remain slaves to them. But when we believe they have more power than they do, we demonstrate our lack of faith. We show that we don't trust that the King of Kings is really up to the task of our modern 2024 troubles. When we fixate on the globalists and speak as if they have some supernatural ability to thwart God's plan, we call Jesus a liar and a weakling. Folks, Jesus is the Word. He is the truth made flesh. He cannot lie, but we certainly can refuse to believe him, and we do. And we see it all over the place. The patriot movement is full of it right now. So what do we do with this fear? Because it's real. How do we manage our worries in confusing times like this? It's not difficult. Repent of your unbelief and believe the gospel. Preach the gospel to yourself if you're unsure. There's wonder-working power in those words and in the blood of the Lamb. You can believe him. You can believe the word. It's the only guarantee you'll ever have. Jesus will conquer, in fact, has conquered, and we will win. In fact, we have already won. So let us believe. Take courage. Be of good cheer. And so we end right where we began, once again. The number one threat to American sovereignty is the loss of our local autonomy. And defending American sovereignty begins locally. In fact, defending your freedom begins with your faith. Your faith in what Christ has said, believing in him, being of good cheer. Take courage. You're going to have trouble here, but he has overcome the world. All the pieces on the chessboard are ultimately in his control. If you find that hard to believe, I suggest that you read your Bible. All right. So, you got anything to add on there?
That was perfect. Thank you.
All right. So that's maybe a good way to get back into the flow. For those of you who are still with us, the viewers always drop off toward the end, and it's usually the people who watch us more loyal are more loyal viewers at the end. So I just thought I would save this piece for the end to seem like I didn't want to seem like I was pandering or anything. But we've been off. We've been away for a good 2 weeks now, and that's because a couple weeks ago my father got ill, and about a week after that went to hospice. And then I guess it was a week ago tonight. In fact, what time is it? Yeah, it's a week ago right now at this time, when he passed away. So over the past week, we've been dealing with that. So we'd ask for your prayers for perseverance at a difficult time. But I will say this in encouragement to you, and Summer will help me out with this, because we had an experience at my dad's passing that was I don't want to say it was unexpected, but it was truly good. It was a moment where, well, one of the hospice nurses that was there with us, who had been there with us He was in there for 6 days. He died on the 6th day. She told us after he passed that was a good death. And that was good to hear. And the reason she said that is because, well, I don't know. Summer, can you explain it?
Well, there were many of us that were around your father when he passed, actually laying our hands on him and praying for him. And it was amazing to feel the peace in the room, the supernatural peace that we all had in that moment. And your mother saying, call out to Jesus, call out to Jesus. And that's what he did. And we were there, and he wasn't alone, and we prayed. And it was incredible because you could truly feel the presence of God there and his angels ministering. And we just knew that, your mother said, test it out for us. Mm-hmm. And it was like he needed that permission, and he left.
He did, and it was a good death, and it was good death for those reasons.
Yeah.
And I'll share with you. I spoke at his funeral. I'll share a couple things just for the verse, the passage that I thought of when I wasn't there when my mother said that, but Summer told me about it, and then it just reminded me of Psalm 34. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. Magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. And that's what we did. That's what we did at that time. And then Psalm 34:4. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. 2 Corinthians 1, starting at verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. Because as we share abundantly in Christ's sufferings, so through Christ we share abundantly in comfort too. If we're afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation. And if we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which you experience when you patiently endure the same sufferings that we suffer. Paul's talking about a particular persecution that they had endured. Our hope for you is unshaken, for we know that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in our comfort.